1, 2, 3. Perfect. Okay, so basically what we want to do now is just kind of go over, kind of look back, and I want to know what went well and what didn't go so well, and what kind of comments you guys might have about certain things that we've done, and things we tried a few new things in this conference. I want to see what your perceptions were about that and so forth. So let me just go ahead and I'll ask you a few questions. Okay, why don't you start?
I'm going to leave soon, so I'd like to make my statement now. And it's probably completely obvious. I enjoy the exercise, but for those of us who are not in the inner group, we really don't have anything to do except be an audience. And I remember at first, had everybody was participating. And now I guess we've outgrown that. And I don't know if you want to change the idea of the exercise. I still think it's a good idea, but most of us are left out.
Yeah, I think we're going to be doing it more like we've done it before, assuming we'll do that. Now, one of the things we did about the exercise this time was we really cut the amount of time in the conference dedicated to the exercise down. For example, we had the groups gathered in previous conferences. We've had some group discussions like that on every day of the meetings, concluded on Friday. So after each press release, we would have an opportunity for people to get together and discuss. There was some concern that was raised from one of the other conferences that that time took away too much time for paper presentations, so we dropped back and changed it to what you see now. So this time we only had one exercise discussion during the week, and then of course the one today. So what are your feelings about that, the two alternatives? Barry? Have a vote. Well, if anybody has any specific comments one way or the other, I know some of you have been through it in both fashions. What are your thoughts? Should we leave it the way it is now, where we have lots of room for papers and not as much discussion of the exercise? Thoughts? Yeah.
I think I can empathize both ways. It's great having more time for papers. I would in the future like to see more interaction between the teams. I felt like we were pretty stovepiped, and I'd agree with Dave that we didn't have a lot to do. After maybe the first meeting of a team, that team sort of concluded and went away. Yep. And it would have been nice to have more interaction, more time steps, thinking as a modeler, where, everybody interacts, and then we click the clock forward, and now we have to take feedback from the other groups. So yeah, more team-to-team interaction.
We'll have to see how we can fit it in, yeah. Now, the other question, okay, I'll take a comment on this one, go ahead.
I remember the Flagstaff exercise where the setup was very conducive to communication by having all at round tables in the room.
Yep.
And there was also a little bit an element of chaos in there.
Yep.
Of course, it's hard to script with the orbital elements, determination, and where it actually hits and so on.
Yes.
I realize that's hard with the preparation, but that might be an element worth exploring in the next
you mean just the chaos?
Just keep the scenario a bit more open.
Yes.
The briefing materials are really excellent and very high details, and I realize that it's a lot of work to set that up, but maybe there's a way to find 2 or 3 possible scenarios that can be prepared at a little less detail. Yep. To give the audience an opportunity to interact and really come up with interesting ideas. So for example, like in Tokyo, the surprising deflection certainly also changed the scenario at some point.
Yes. No, I thought that was a very good discussion. Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, I would also be signing up for the team of the previous sort of model when it was a little bit throughout the week, maybe less. I agree that those papers needs to be presented. I would think that there was an effect on the spirit in Japan where, at coffee breaks, we would talk about it and it's pretty much was a lot of networking because just a lot of transdisciplinary discussions, and I talked with way more people in Japan than here. The room was in a half circle. We would see more people within the room. We would interact more, and every morning, every night, we would have these transdisciplinary interactions because we had to talk about the scenario.
Yeah, nice. That's a thought, and we actually tried that in one of them. I forget where. But yes, we did have it so you could talk about it at lunchtime, and maybe we can build something in like that. good thought. I'll mark that down. Okay, next.
Yeah, Bill, just to add to the comments, again, I've been at multiple PDCs and yeah, I think we've kind of gone back. Maybe the pendulum swung a little bit too far. I don't know if we can bring it back, but one idea, and this is just a first thought, and this is probably the way to implement it, but like you've got these shows where you vote, where the audience votes. We've all got smartphones. Maybe we could create a structure without getting into the minutia of each detail, either have by the groups, if you're assigned to groups. So it's kind of a controlled experiment, not a free for all.
Certainly something to think about. I've seen those kind of things. It can be
on your computer, on a smartphone, or just raise a hand.
Yeah, true. Okay. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, but the idea is make decisions, and then the threat master, you guys adjust to it. Well, here's the consequence of making this decision.
Yeah,
it's more real life.
That is, but one of the problems that Paul had when we did that in, I think it was Japan, he was up late at night putting those adjustments in, and so it's not so easy. I mean, the guys that work this stuff, I mean, they have great detail. They put great detail, and it's faithful to the physics, if you will. So, yeah. But your point's a good one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't hear the beginning of Dave's comments, so I hope I'm not repeating. But on Tuesday, the time was used very poorly in that almost everybody wasn't involved for, I don't know, an hour and a half. We just milled around while people in some back room sat and talked and so on. And so at a minimum, if the people were up here, we could at least have listened in.
Right.
The other thing is, it was confusing as where the groups were meeting. It was not specified where to go immediately, and there was a lot of confusion. And past exercises, it was clearly specified which room or which corner was for which group.
Yeah, that's good. A very good point, I think. Anybody else have a comment on that, on the exercise itself? Just the way it was conducted and so forth? Okay.
Just a comment regarding the deciders and world leaders.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The fact that a lot of time there is this sort of embodiment of a character, and the engineers and scientists in this room have to play a role, that worked really well in Japan. And at the same time, I understand that you would like for it to be a little bit more realistic and have policy people involved who actually worked at FEMA and in those places. So there are certain groups where you cannot embody a scientist if you're not a scientist. The same way, maybe creating a category for lawyers and policymakers, and this is where you invite those leaders to be part of the policy and the law, and those lawyers and leaders give that expert opinion, but then you still keep this idea of those scientists and engineers to be empowered to play those deciders and be on stage and have this interaction.
Okay.
Because with that, you have people who are not used to do this exercise to come up with ideas that we would not hear otherwise. If you put politicians on the stage, they will have their speech, and then it's their role, and they have to be careful with what they have to say, and that is not going to help the imagination of all the things that could go wrong. But if you put people who are on the ground and who are working on those topics and let them free to think of having a rogue nation or stuff like that, that kind of spice up the conference, and everybody gets involved. And I absolutely support the idea for every sort of decision to be put on stage and have this interaction with absolutely everyone.
Yeah, very good. I agree with you. Hang on a second. LA, yeah, you want to come to the mic or use one? Okay, go ahead.
Just a very quick comment. I think the idea that came up earlier to also have the science as an additional group, because for the purpose of the exercise, we always want to have an impact to exercise the civil defense part, and it certainly was fun to listen in how to evacuate New York and so on.
Yes.
But if we had a real impact, then it would be the science bonanza of the century. I mean, imagine you could measure and track and film Tunguska. It would be something like the International Geophysical Year.
Wow. So. Yeah, it'd be amazing, as long as nobody got hurt. LA?
Good afternoon, Bill. Thank you. L.A. Lewis from FEMA. With regard to my colleague here who just made the comment about policymakers, I kind of agree, but I also disagree because a lot of times, particularly for somebody who is an emergency manager or disaster response. Having a scientist play the role, that's one thing. I think our interaction is important, but I think it's important for us to be here because you need to understand authorities that you have and don't have. There are a lot of scientific decisions that are being made, but when it comes down to what are you going to do for your citizen, who has the authority to make those decisions, those are the policymakers.
That's right, no question. And there are policies in some places which need to be drafted as well. So I think that was some good input that we got too. Okay, anything else on the exercise? And again, I thought the people who developed that thing did just a fabulous job, and I think they were very aware that this is, shall we say, a critical audience in the sense that if they said it was out of view and people will say, no, it is, and you know, it's all that kind of stuff. So they were very cognizant of the kinds of questions they were going to get and tried to design the threat so that it was consistent with what would actually happen. So I thought that was really good. Okay, well, you talked a lot about the time for the exercise and the idea that we would have more time to discuss that on a daily basis, I think would be nice. The trade is we have only so much time in the day, and we had a lot of presentations this time. And the question, one of the concerns I had was that they were limited to 12 minutes or 10 minutes plus questions, if you will. And or 15 plus or whatever. And so the idea, the concern is that we gave up some of the exercise time so that we could have more papers. And even at that, we got so many applications for potential talks that it was we had to really limit the time available. So what are your thoughts about what we did this time relative to the time allocated for presentations?
I think we should add the time on things like lunches rather than take it away from paper time.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. So we had an hour and a half for lunches. So in this case, we made it a little long because I think you maybe you're right, but we made it a little long because we knew people would leave. So yeah, good point. Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, I see your point, but that's good.
Yeah,
next chart.
Well, just quick on that. I didn't like the lunch speeches particularly. It didn't help me at all.
I'm sorry, one more time.
The lunch speeches were not very useful to me. But anyway, I was going to suggest that you could have more posters, as many of us did, but have a poster session fairly early on in which everybody gets 2 slides and 2 minutes to talk about it. I think we did that in Frascati, and I think that was a good idea.
Okay. Okay, very
so
good.
I would echo that. I mean, more time for posters, have a way of having a couple opportunities, poster sessions earlier on, because some of the topics were already discussed and the posters, reference that later on in the week. I would maybe think about lengthening, maybe not having as many talks and lengthening the time of talks, because I think some people felt really constrained in the time frame.
Right.
So that's something to consider as you structure your program. But maybe have a little bit more time for the talks and actually questions, because a lot of times people gave their presentation and there were no time for questions or actually discussion of the topic at hand.
Right. So what do you think a good time would be?
So you can't make it, I don't think you can make it, 20 minutes per, but, maybe bump it up to 15 minutes, in terms of the slots, so it would give more time. There were a lot of times when we'd have people who'd get through stuff and not be able to answer any questions. Right. I would also emphasize to the chairs to keep it on time and also keep the chairs' comments brief, because sometimes the chairs' comments, they were commenting on things and that ran people out of time, so they could not answer any questions.
Yes. And generally speaking, however, I tried to make sure that every speaker had the same time, so in a session at least. And most of them were very good about keeping to the time, and my harassment seems to have helped.
Bill, just a thought, I don't know if this is logistically possible, but either adding an extra hour, and I know it makes for a longer day, but if you have, you got your breaks and all that, maybe it's not that bad, or adding an extra day. We only meet once every 2 years. If we started on a Sunday, would people, I don't know how that would affect attendance. I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, it's also been suggested, well, I've had somebody at least one person say we ought to have 2 tracks. Ed? Okay, I'm just saying that somebody. And
All in favor?
You know, we had a lot of, let's see, the first, session 2 lasted almost 2 days, I think. Half of one day and a good chunk of the second. And so that was a busy group. There's a lot going on in that area and people wanted to talk about it. So that's the challenge. And so when we did the times, we did an assessment of how many abstracts were submitted for each session, and then tried to adjust the times based on the abstract submitted. So, but we can look at that and see how we might handle it. That is a challenge. Dealing with the time is an issue. So maybe adding some time, and I like the idea of maybe using lunch for discussion too would be useful. So see how we can do that.
Hi, Bill. I kind of say this every time, and this time I'm really happy with the poster session. I think having them up all week was great. Having them, you know, very close so that people could go show their posters very conveniently was really good. I look back at past years and it's always kind of been off either in some side room or only up for a little while, or even, you know, not anywhere convenient. So having them right next to the conference room and up all week was great. And I would encourage you to, you know, make it even bigger next time and even more integrated next time. And I like to compare it to American Geophysical Union Fall Conference, which I go to every year. And they've grown the poster session where it's almost the dominant part of the meeting, and in a lot of ways the best part of the meeting. I think more people attend the poster session than the technical presentations, and the posters outnumber the presentations by something like 2 to 1 at AGU. And I mean, I think that's a good trend. I really do, because there's a lot more personal interaction.
Okay, so I think the role of the session chairs then would be to make sure that the talks that are accepted for presentation, oral presentation, would be really representative of, you know, the technology, if you will, or the area that's being discussed. That would be good too. So yeah, good.
Just going back to the duration of the talks, I would advocate for separating the 2 minutes for Q&A from the actual talk time, so that the speaker has so much time and can't get away with not having to answer questions by just going over the time.
Good thought. Okay.
The evenings, there was one poster session. If you had the reception on Sunday night, then you could have, more, maybe another poster session and give more prominence to the poster session on a second evening. I personally actually liked the lunch speakers. And I think we want to integrate with people like that. And they're more likely to come if they're featured speakers in one way or another.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's one way. One of the things that the conference offers is a way of educating a community, or potentially a government, I guess, about what this topic is, and inviting people like that makes them take it seriously, particularly if they're going to speak to a bunch of us. So it is an opportunity for enhancing the educational aspects, I think.
Okay, I concede that. That's good. The posters are more effective if they lie between this room and the coffee.
Yes, what a nice thought, yeah.
Have a diffusion process through the poster.
Okay, well located, right?
Oh, it's always important to look at what went well.
Yeah.
We were all in one room. There was not a single presentation or talk that did not improve my knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
The setup of the hotel, where you had a room in the back where we could have side conversations, was amazing. You could get away from the noise when the noise got too much, but then, the atmosphere was excellent. There's not parties going on. I mean, so there was a lot of things that were done very well in planning for this. Thank you.
Oh, good, thanks.
On the topic of things going well, as the NASA press officer for this event, I just want to give a shout out to Paul and Kelly and Brent for dropping everything and being on every interview that we asked them to. Kelly had to jump on BBC Radio at 6:30 a.m. the other day. It was just, and Marina and Davide, if you're still here. Anyway, all the folks who came to do interviews, thank you for that.
Excellent, thanks. Let me. In one conference, we did have, maybe at the end of each session, we would have, as someone suggested, little 2-minute presentations from people who actually wrote posters. And that seemed to be pretty popular. We just line them up and they'd walk by and say, here's my poster, and have a couple of charts. And it's a way of acquainting people what's out there too. So what were your thoughts about that? Yeah. Like that? Okay. Okay, I think we can certainly bring that back. Okay, let's see. Any other comments on? Yes, go ahead.
I think it's a combination of all these things to make the exercise more efficient. I thought these poster talks in the previous conferences were a very good idea to have a broader overview in a session while giving the selected talks a little bit more time.
Yep.
If we have a longer lunch break, that could also be longer despite having an invited speaker, which I thought was a very nice thing to do, to network with that level of government and institutions. That certainly helps to keep these discussions like in Tokyo about solving the exercise in the lunch break, if that's maybe on that day half an hour longer, and maybe also extending the day a little bit. On a Sunday, doing something on a Sunday, I'm skeptical because of the travel. So many people travel in and out very tightly to the conference. But if there's an up-to-date event like Chelyabinsk was in Flagstaff, or the Bering Sea event was here, then putting that on a Sunday evening as an option would certainly be interesting.
Yeah, that worked very well, I thought. Yes.
So it's a bit of everything, and that I think the exercise in general went very well. The time allocated also was good. The only that was maybe location specific, that we split up in so many rooms, and there was no way to really interact in the second round of the discussions. That would really be my only criticism.
Yeah.
And everything else was fantastic. Really.
Yeah, I know Flagstaff. I really enjoyed the chaos myself. I thought that was a lot of fun. So if that one had a setup which enabled it to do relatively easy, this area here, this one is not so easy, and so my preference would have been to have this place set up that way. It just wasn't feasible here. So, but if we can do it, that would be nice. Now, if you've been to Vienna, you'll know that the facility there is more like this and less flexible, because it's really one of the main meeting rooms, and that has some really good features, but it makes little discussions like that a little hard too. So we'll have to figure out how we can separate ourselves. We are going to have specific rooms set aside. Maybe we can have more than one group in a room. That would certainly liven it up. And the other thing we had in the past was I got some comments that some people felt that the exercise groups were so large that they didn't get a chance to put any input in at all. They just felt, just sort of intimidated and such. So the question is, one of the things that would be nice to do is to have multiple, small groups. And originally, my original vision was that we would have round tables, 10 people each. Several tables talked about the same topic, funnel their stuff into a central place where a single individual could come present it, and or do something like that. It wasn't possible to do here, but I think some idea like that, if we can have the room set up to do that, would be very nice too. You had something? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Brett.
So Bill, Paul and I have discussed just now an idea that might help solve a lot of these issues. And it kind of depends on us to some extent, but if we were able to get the exercise, the scenario stuff computed and ready to go much further in advance, then we could make it available online, and perhaps even provide some kind of mechanism online where people could start collaborating months and months and months ahead of the conference, or thinking about the scenario and the mission design. I mean, we'd start off with the same level of information at day zero. That's all they'd get.
Yeah.
But that's all they need to do a really thorough analysis. And so maybe that'll help if we can do that.
It could help. I mean, again, we put the press release out early now. It goes up for a month or two ahead of time whenever it gets done there. So so we can do that. One of the things that I find useful in these kinds of meetings is actually the discussion itself. among different people with different perspectives, and it has a way of dredging stuff out that we would not otherwise have had. And so I would like to, I mean, I do think having people come in cold can be very useful. So, you have a question, good.
Just one thing I want to point out, Bill, is we didn't lock you into the rooms.
No, I know. Yeah, it's true. That's true.
You could have sent people to go talk to other groups. In fact, that's what we actually envisioned, is that there would be interchange between the groups, people going back and forth.
Very true. Okay. We'll have to exercise that more
I
deliberately.
I need to make that clearer.
Yeah. No, that's good. Thank you. Yes.
Well,
and pre-plan. Yeah.
Agreed. We could print it out so everybody has a copy of it, but it was on a slide in the front of the room.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Yes.
Sorry. One of the things I think would be helpful to help the discussion and everything else within the groups is pre-identify facilitators. That way you have people who they know how to draw out the discussion. They act as facilitators, leaders of the discussion. And I think that will help cut down on time and confusion and be able to draw out information from people that maybe felt like they couldn't contribute. And their role is to make sure that everybody has a chance to contribute their contributions.
Yes, very good point. Okay.
Yeah, I think the last session in Tokyo was more satisfying in a number of ways. One, the small groups could interact better. It was more educational, and we could come up with plans that, in that case, actually came close to being implemented in the exercise. At this time, we talked a lot about what would be the optimum approach to doing the deflection. I think we came up with a lot of details that would have totally averted this whole catastrophe that happened.
He admitted it.
Yeah. And we felt like we were an important cog last time because what we recommended was actually adopted, whereas this time that did not happen.
That's right. That was done on purpose. And the reason for that, of course, was that these guys have to do a lot of work to incorporate anything like that. And it was simply more than they wanted to do.
Yeah. And I have to leave soon, but I wanted to get in my 2 cents worth on what we've learned in this exercise.
Sure.
And first thing is that if you're an engineer and you design something that has to be reliable, how do you do that? Mm-hmm. Well, you build in redundancy. You have multiple approaches to satisfy your goal, whereas in this particular case, we did not. Number 2, I think there should be work on the international scene to come up with an agreement that nukes are okay in a situation like this. There should be no hesitation whatsoever when life and limb are at stake. Number 3, I find it very paradoxical that all over many places in the world, there are silos in the ground with missiles ready to wage war, at any second, whereas we have to wait 4 or 5 years to get a program together to save ourselves from an imminent threat from the sky. I think we need to emphasize being way more prepared by having something equivalent to that, boosters maybe on the ready for something that could happen very quickly. We always assume the best scenario that we have 10 or 12 years to work on this problem. But something like a small comet coming, from some high elevation angle, not in the ecliptic, is going to surprise us, and we were not going to be ready. There was absolutely nothing we could do.
Right.
So I think we need to think about filling some of those silos with something ready to protect all of us, in the event of a threat from the sky.
That's right. Good point. So be a nice topic potentially for someone, is to lay out some of these things. And again, one of the exercises this is an 8-year warning, I think, right? What was the longest one we've ever done? Do you know? 10 years? Yeah. So It would be interesting because I think you're certainly right about that, and trying to encourage governments to put money into a program that may not be useful for 100 years is something that humans don't do very well. And so that's going to be part of the challenge. So the question is then, since that's not going to be a likely outcome, how would you design a program so that you can take advantage of the existing capabilities when something like this comes along? I'm not asking the question exactly. I'm just saying that that would be something where some papers and such would be very nice.
Hi, I'd just like to suggest a couple of things for the exercise. I think it would have been perhaps a little bit more fun this time if there had been a few more choices, things people maybe could have voted on. And the other thing I also noticed, particularly the first couple of days on the conference, there were quite a number of interested folks watching online who couldn't actually be here. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe if there could be an app for that maybe they could have actually taken part and had a vote in some of how the scenario plays out. I realize you don't want completely unlimited choices, but you could maybe restrict them to a few things to vote between.
Yeah,
that would be my suggestion.
You could ask them, what would you do now? And give them a couple of things to check off.
Absolutely.
Good idea. Okay.
Choose your own adventure.
Yeah, nice.
I guess I'd like to take exception to what he was recommending. I think that while we would like to do our job completely and most effectively and so on, there are lots of other hazards and issues in society, and there doesn't exist the resources in the world to do everything for which there's a positive benefit to cost ratio. And we have to realize that the risk that we're addressing is really very low. And the chances of it happening so that we need to act rapidly is even lower than having a longer time to plan for it. And I think that, we're self-interested to say, hey, let's have missiles in the silo and equip, because, geez, there's many other things that I think are probably much more, whether it be an opioid crisis or all kinds of other much more serious risks. So we should behave responsibly. We have, as Rick Binzel has been arguing, the responsibility to try to take this seriously in case something actually does happen. But the idea I think it's far beyond a rational assessment of the risk to do what you nodded your head and wrote it down, but I take exception to that.
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah. Okay, next.
I'd like to add to that it's very easy to keep something ready, and what we need to keep ready is a lively space program and the people who run it. Yeah. Having something kind of in a launch pad or in a silo doesn't help you. You even notice this with the 30-year-old hardware, 40, 50-year-old hardware that's down there at the moment. It's totally obsolete. It's the people who are familiar with the basic technologies are sometimes dying out in these very long-running space programs.
Yep.
And it's the people who are at the telescopes. For some time, the asteroids drove the wide-angle surveys. Now it's back to cosmology, because the cosmologists discovered how much science you can do by looking with the wide angle, not with the telelens. So on the LSST, the first 3 science cases were not asteroid related. It's like the bycatch is, again, the asteroids like it used to be 40 years ago. And we benefit largely from that development that we have triggered as a community. But the other communities benefit even more. And it's the same for spaceflight. If you keep doing missions only every 20 years to a specific target, every generation has to start learning from scratch. But if you go continuously, like the robotic spaceflight goes to Mars, you keep that knowledge alive and trade it from student to student, from PhD to PhD, from engineer to engineer. It's constantly going on, and that's where we have to get with our exploration of the solar system. Do more missions, do maybe smaller missions if the money is limited, and that will give you the technical base to deflect and also be responsive about it. To add to that, we have a lively commercial space market that provides us the large launch vehicles to go on quick trajectories, also especially with smaller science payloads that serve the geostationary market. And also the geostationary buses are useful for heavy spacecraft within certain limits in distance from the sun. And there are dozens of launches a year to serving that market. So we have the industrial base. What we need is the knowledge base and the experience base to go to small objects in the solar system. And that needs to be constantly maintained, like we constantly have to do the surveys to give these people a lead time to find these objects.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
I was just going to say something very similar. Basically, we don't have to have an 8-year lead time. We could have a 50-year lead time if we do our job right. And so first, number one, launch NeoCam or something very similar.
Yes.
But a single string is always dangerous, and we've seen this kind of problem before. So also invest in some ground-based telescope work, large telescopes for imaging and astrometry and colors.
Okay.
Just had a couple of ideas based on other conferences. If you want those policymakers and leaders to come and interact, one thing that could attract them is those, they call it high-level launch panels. So you have 5 people who come from those, OSTP and FEMA, and you dedicate one slot of time, either in the morning or at lunch, maybe to allow for better networking, and you have them all come at the same time. So they would have that time, you might have more time for posters, and it could attract them to meet with each other as well. Yeah. The one thing that I would like to say thank you is the session 7, because at the last conference in Japan, you said that you wanted more lawyers and you wanted more policymakers, and you actually created time within the schedule to invite for poster sessions and to invite for presentations. And we had several presentations and people from Czech Republic and from Austria and friends. I mean, you really left space for us to be there and grow and interact with all of you. However, I'm hoping for the scenario that the idea of the UN said no to a nuclear device is not always going to be the cop-out. I think there are so many more problems that policy and legal advisors can help with. If the private sector, if Elon Musk had decided to do something about it, what would have happened? We can help answer those questions and just go a little bit further away from just something went wrong because they didn't send a nuclear device there. Right. And finally, the people outside, the people who organize were extremely nice, always, just every time, every morning, saying hello, being joyful at this ceremony, every time, absolutely every time. So thank you very much for the very warm welcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were very nice, yeah. Well, somebody mentioned, I just want to say one thing. You were talking about the technologies, and certainly the missions and so forth are very important, and we'll build a cadre that can do that. But one of the things that we all know is that the vehicles that can carry stuff out to deep space are somewhat limited. And things like having some kind of standards for interfaces with payload interfaces on those vehicles might be useful. That way you'd have the ability to take a particular payload and put it on multiple vehicles. So that might be something to be considered. There may be other things we can propose that would be useful to make sure that we have the capacity available in short time if we need it. Okay, so your points.
Duncan Steele, I live in New Zealand. I'm pleased to hear that both technical aspects and international collaboration have been brought up. There's only 2 of us here, 2 countries represented from the Southern Hemisphere.
There should be more in Vienna.
Total population is 8 million, Uruguay and New Zealand, which is rather pathetic. And actually, I'm here on my own dime. I've taken a week's leave and I've paid for myself to come.
You're a good
person. I'm not here to represent a nation. Yeah. I actually moved to New Zealand from Australia because I was so dismayed and embarrassed by Australia's reaction to the whole thing. Actually, I've been totally badmouthed by Australian politicians on the Australian equivalent of 60 Minutes. It's called 60 Minutes. And it's absolute disgrace to the nation, the way in which, having said that, why has that come about? Well, that's a different story. They don't necessarily get good advice from people who are vying for the same set of funds. In terms of technology, again, it comes back to Southern Hemisphere. One thing I would have liked to see, and maybe it's happened in previous PDCs, I've only been to one in Flagstaff. In terms of the exercise, I I would like to see, what technology gaps or what, instrumentation would have been real useful. So for example, the prime one is, we always used to think that one radar return, Arecibo or Goldstone, was, and the astrometrists can correct me on this, but one radar return is equivalent to 10 years of optical astrometry from the ground. And there's no Southern Hemisphere planetary radar. Yep. And that is, I'm not suggesting that anybody else should be building it, but I think the nations in the Southern Hemisphere should be building it. They're putting billions and billions into this square kilometer array for astrophysical purposes. Having a planetary radar in the Southern Hemisphere, which is not something you can build in a hurry, is an essential thing. My final point, people are worried about the timescale and so on. Let's remember that this is the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 landing, something for which the whole of the rest of the world, is still beholden to the US and owe you a deep debt of gratitude for the inspiration and everything else which that's given. But just let's all remember that the time between JFK giving his speech at the Rice University Stadium and Apollo 11 landing was 6 years and 10 months.
Yeah.
It just shows what humans can do when they're determined to do it.
When they're pushed, that's right.
I need to say something about Southern Hemisphere radar because it's not true it doesn't exist. So as you know, in Canberra, that's part of DSN network, and there are small transmitters on 34-meter antennas that have been used on asteroids. Actually, they're growing their program. There is also the SS-43, that's a 70-meter dish, that's Goldstone twin. Basically, it also has capability of transmit. And as of next year, they're installing 80 kilowatt transmitter. So that is going to be very capable radar. But this is going to be, this data are going to be public. This astrometry is going straight.
Hey, Brent. Your chart. Okay, I think we can go on for a bit here, and I want to make sure we do one thing. So if you don't mind, I'm going to break here, and we'll potentially come back, and we'll see how it goes. But there are some specific recommendations that have been suggested that we might want to include in our report, and I'd like to have that. I think you have a chart to present on that. Okay, so this is one. And I'd like to have you take a look at that, and in this case, we will in fact take a vote. And so we'll see whether we should include that statement or something basically derived from it in our summary report. Okay, thoughts? Okay. Okay, so anybody in opposition to this particular concept? Yeah, I didn't think so. By the way, I heard a little piece of fake news when we were talking at lunchtime. Apparently there was a story that some person came across that said that, well, look at this, the conference is looking at a meteor or a potential threat in 2029. Apophis is coming by in 2029. Maybe there's some kind of something afoot here with the governments, you see. Who knows? Anyway, these kind of things are interesting. Okay, so I think on that one, that sounds good. Could you, next chart, please? Oh, I can control it. Oh, there we go. Thank you. This is for the Hera mission and so forth. So go ahead and take a look at that and see what you think. So this does seem like a very unique opportunity to really learn something about what happens when you actually impact an object. So what are your thoughts on that? Anyone think that this is something the conference should not support? Does that mean that everyone thinks we should? Okay, very good. Then we'll build that one in too. Were there only those two? One more. Okay. What was that one? Go ahead. Click one more. Okay, there we go. What do you think about that? NeoCam, funny thing. So NeoCam, we had several excellent presentations on that, and clearly we need to do that if we're going to protect the planet. So go ahead and read the statement, and then again, we'll include something like that in the report. So the recommendation is that the community gathered at the PDC encourages the full funding of NeoCam, the NeoCam mission for flight development at the earliest opportunity. And I can't imagine anybody opposing that, but you never know. Anybody think that that's anything we shouldn't do? Okay, great. We'll do it. Well done. Okay, now let's see. We have about, let's say 15 minutes left. Let me see if I had anything I didn't do anything. Just back to the conference a little bit. You're familiar with the topics we had in the string, how that conference flowed. We started from the observation side, and then we went from techniques that can be used for deflection, then to missions to actually carry those things out there, and then to what happens if something hits, and talk to some of the legal and policy issues and educational things. Is there anything else that you think we should try to highlight by having a session on it that we don't have a session on? Okay, well, again, I think if any of you think about that sort of thing in the next year or so, you should just let us know, and you can do that by emailing me, and I'll feed it into our planning group. Also, we have a group of, as I've mentioned a few times, we have a group of about 50 people on our mailing list. We have a telecon when we get started about once a month to go over details of what this conference is going to look like. If any of you are having an itching need to feel like you want to be part of that, you're welcome to. And that's a good way to feed comments into the process, and we can help deal with that. So again, if you are interested in that, just email me and we'll add you to the list. Also, if there's some of you on there who don't want to be on there anymore, you can let me know that too. And in that case, you can just not dial into the intercom to the net. So, and by the way, one of the challenges I've had, and I think it sort of echoes to the Southern Hemisphere comment, we've had our comments are held at 8 o'clock in the morning. Let's see, like either 1500 or 1600 UTC, which is like 8 o'clock in the morning in California, or depending on what daylight savings time or not. And then it's later in the day in Europe, and it's almost impossible for somebody in Asia to participate simply because of the times. Now, Gerhard was good enough to actually set up a little splinter group where we tried to involve Japan and others involved. We didn't have very good response there, and if any of you have any clever ideas about what we could do more along those lines, that would be very nice. And also in the Southern Hemisphere piece, I don't think we've had anybody participate from down there either. So if you would like to join us, you're welcome to. And but the times are kind of peculiar, and I don't know how to deal with that. Somebody's going to suffer. It's just the way the earth turns, So yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know it's not exactly. It's okay for everybody in the U.S. and probably in portions of Europe too. But then as you go further east, it gets to be a real problem. So I don't know how we're going to deal with that. So, but if you have ideas, let us know. Okay, anything else we need to talk about? Okay, if not, then I think we'll adjourn the conference. I thank all of you for coming. Don't go